Think about the last time you stood at the end of August, looking at your tomato plants. How many tomatoes did you get this season? How many did you expect? If those two numbers do not match, if the harvest was smaller than the plants looked like they were going to give you, there is one thing worth knowing. The most likely explanation is not the weather, not the soil, not the seed. It is the shears. Specifically, what was on the blade before it touched your plants, and what it carried from one open wound to the next. This is not something most gardening channels talk about, not because they do not know. Because the video that teaches you to remove suckers gets more views than the video that tells you to stop. You have probably been doing this for years. This is the video that explains what it has been costing you. Most gardening videos skip this entirely. They tell you to remove suckers. They never say the advice only applies to one specific type of tomato plant. If you are growing any of the other three, removing suckers is not pruning. It is removing the only branches that were ever going to give you fruit. There are 4 types. The mistake usually happens before anyone checks which one they have. Determinate tomatoes, Roma, Celebrity, Bush beefsteak. Most paste varieties grow to 3 or 4 feet and stop. Every flower cluster they will ever produce is already sitting on those suckers. Remove them and the plant has nothing left to flower from. Season over. Most people who prune determinate tomatoes never find out why the harvest was so small. They assume it was the weather. Semi-determinate is where the mistake is hardest to catch. It starts like a vine, first foot or two looks exactly like an indeterminate. That is when most people start pinching. But after those first 2 feet, it shifts. Throws suckers everywhere, bushes out hard. Every one of those suckers is a flower waiting to open. Celebrity Plus is semi-determinate. Most people buying it do not know that. Dwarf varieties work the same way regardless of what the label says. Do not touch them. The only type where any of this applies is indeterminate. Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, beefsteak, most heirlooms, most cherry and grape varieties. They keep growing all season and can handle some pruning because they never stop producing new growth. Check the label now. Determinate, semi-determinate, or dwarf put the shears down for the rest of the season. Label gone? Look at the tip of the main stem in midsummer. Flower bud at the top with no new leaf growth above it, determinate. Hands off. Main stem still pushing new leaves, indeterminate. Keep watching. Even on indeterminate, even on the right plant, what the shears do to the harvest is worse than most people expect. And that is before they carry anything from one plant to the next. Picture the sucker you pinched off last week. That small green shoot. Soft enough to break with 2 fingers. You removed it quickly. Moved to the next one. Did not think twice. That sucker was going to become a second main stem. And that second main stem was going to produce flower clusters at exactly the same spacing as the first. Same intervals, same density. That is not flexible. It is coded into the plant. You cannot negotiate with it by pruning. 2 stems, twice the flowers. You are not pruning. You are subtracting. A research team in Bangladesh grew the same tomato variety side by side. Same soil, same water, same season. The only difference was how many stems they allowed each plant to keep. 3 stems, 75.6 tons per hectare. 1 stem, 43,1 tonnes per hectare. That is a 43% drop from the same plant. Then came the 2024 numbers, and they were worse. An indeterminate tomato grown without any pruning reached 28.39 tons per hectare. The same variety, with every sucker removed, produced 12.61 tons. Less than half. Same seed, same ground, same season. The careful gardener, the one who checked the plant every week, who followed every instruction, finished the season with less than half the tomatoes of the gardener who forgot to prune at all. There is a moment every gardener remembers. End of August. They are standing at the fence with their neighbor. The neighbor's plants are tangled, sprawling, almost out of control, and they are full of tomatoes. Their own plants are neat, single-stemmed, trained perfectly, and half empty. They cannot explain it. They did everything right. The neighbor did nothing. And somehow the nothing worked. What they do not know yet, what almost no video ever explains, is that losing the harvest is only the first problem. The second problem starts the moment the pruning shears touch the plant, and it spreads. You woke up early this morning, went out before the heat came, picked up the shears, walked the row the way you always do plant to plant, removing the suckers the way you learned. What you did not know is that somewhere in that row, One plant was already carrying something. No sign of it on the outside. The bacteria had been living inside the stem for days, invisible, waiting for exactly what you were about to give it. A fresh cut. Your shears touched that plant. Move to the next one. And the next. You finished the row in 20 minutes. Went back inside. Washed your hands. Put the shears away. Clavibacter michiganensis. That is what traveled with you down the row. It enters through a fresh cut. No color. No smell. Once inside, it starts blocking the water not from the outside, but from within, in a place you will never see until the leaves begin to drop on one side of the plant. 2 weeks later, you walk out on a sunny morning, one plant, half the leaves wilting, the other half still green. You water it more. You think it is the heat. It gets worse. Researchers at Plant Disease tracked what happens when this bacterium enters a planting at just 0.01% contamination. One infected plant. Under humid conditions, it spreads to a 93% mortality rate across the entire row. From one pair of shears that was never cleaned. You did not spread it because you were careless. You spread it because you were thorough. One pair of shears through the entire row. Every sucker removed. Every cut a fresh wound. Every wound a door. The infected plant looked completely healthy when the blade touched it. Symptoms take days. By the time you saw the wilting, the shears had already been everywhere. And that is exactly why it spread. A woman left a comment the morning she watched this. I just removed all my suckers. Now I want to cry. She was not crying about the suckers. What you did this morning, you did. This season is already moving, but there is still one question underneath all of this. If sucker removal does all of this, why does every gardening video on the internet still teach it? The answer does not start with YouTube. It starts in a place most home gardeners have never set foot in. There is one thing that should be cut. Not the suckers, not the stems. Something else, entirely something. Every pruning video walks straight past on the way to telling you to pinch off your harvest. Look at the bottom of your plant. Find the leaves closest to the ground. The ones that have been there since spring, dragging on the soil or hanging just above it. Those leaves are how most tomato seasons end in August instead of October. 2 diseases. Septoria leaf spot and early blight. Both live in the soil. Both travel the same way. Rain hits the ground, water splashes up, spores land on the lowest leaf. That leaf gets infected. The disease moves up. By the time you notice the brown spots, it has been climbing for weeks. Most gardeners see this happening and reach for the fungicide. They spray. They treat the symptoms. The disease keeps climbing anyway, because they never remove the door. The University of Wisconsin studied this in 2004. Pull the leaves within 25 to 30 centimeters of the soil and the splash cycle stops. No wet surface for the spore to land on. No way in. And the number that surprises almost everyone, 1/3. You can remove 1/3 of the total leaves on the plant without touching the yield. Not one tomato fewer. The plant does not register the loss. Those lower leaves were already losing light to the canopy above them. They were not feeding the fruit. They were feeding the disease. Every time it rains on a plant with leaves dragging on the soil, that plant hands the disease a key. Take those leaves off in June. Before the first spot appears, not after. Work up to knee height. Dry morning, clean cut. That is all. The suckers stay. The stems stay. The fruit stays. The only thing gone is the entry point the disease has been using for years. But there is one cut left that most gardeners never make. It is not at the bottom of the plant. It is at the top, and you only get one chance to make it at the right time. It is late August. Your indeterminate tomato plant is still growing. New flowers at the top, new shoots everywhere. The plant has no intention of stopping. But your frost date is 6 to 8 weeks away. A tomato flower needs at least 6 weeks to become a ripe fruit. Those flowers will not make it. The plant keeps pushing energy upward, new growth, new flowers, new fruit that will still be green when the frost arrives. Meanwhile, 30 tomatoes already on the vine sit waiting, full-sized, weeks away from red. The frost does not wait. 20 or 30 tomatoes, lost every August, not to disease, not to pests, to a plant that kept growing when it should have been finishing. 4 to 6 weeks before your first frost cut the top off. The growing tip. Any new flower clusters from the last week or two, cut hard. The plant responds within days. With nothing pulling energy upward, everything reverses. The energy that was pushing new growth now moves down into the fruit already on the vine. Green tomatoes begin to turn, pink first, then red, 30 tomatoes that would have died green. Ripened, one cut, made once. At the right moment, most gardeners look at that plant in late August, still tall, still flowering, and cannot cut the top off something that looks so healthy. Topping is not ending the season early. The plant already has 30 tomatoes on it, some the size of a tennis ball. They need 3 more weeks of energy to turn red. That energy is inside the plant right now, being sent in the wrong direction. One cut redirects it. Stop all pruning 1 to 2 weeks before harvest. Let the plant rebuild a thin layer of leaves above the fruit. Tomatoes in direct sun without cover will burn in the final week. 2 cuts, that is the whole season. One at the bottom in June, lower leaves, knee height, before the disease starts. One at the top in late August, the growing tip, 4 to 6 weeks before frost. Your neighbor spent every Tuesday morning pinching suckers. You did 2 things, months apart. Every August before this, those tomatoes died green on the vine. They did not have to. Next August, find the top of each plant. Make the cut. Go inside. The tomatoes will handle the rest. Next June, you will walk out with a different question. Not, which suckers should I remove today? But, which leaves near the ground need to come off before the rain starts? That is the whole shift. The plant you leave alone this year will be harder to reach into. Messia, Fola. And in late August, when you make the one cut that matters, you will count the tomatoes already on the vine, the ones ripening now, instead of dying green, and understand something that took most gardeners years to figure out. Most of them spent years blaming the weather, the soil, the season. It was the advice. Tell me one thing you are going to do differently this season.